Good afternoon. Now, pay attention. So, my task is to get through some slides quickly to motivate some work that Adám is then going to demonstrate. This tool called Link is perhaps one of the most important tools that we've brought out in the last few years. And how many people now feel they know what it is? Oh, that's helping. Anyway, it's a tool which allows you to, if you have a function and a file, or you want to go one way or the other, Link will link these two together. So a function in your workspace and a file outside in the file system are linked, hence the name. So each code item could be a namespace, but most people seem to want to work, it turns out, at the function level. So each function becomes a file. And Link will link them together. If you edit the function inside the workspace, the file will get updated. And if you edit the function using VS Code or something outside the workspace, then at least if you've configured it the default way, the function will get updated inside the workspace. So quite simply, Link allows you to work in the workspace as you always would, but every single change you make to code in the workspace immediately ends up in a file outside the workspace. And some of you will say, hey, wasn't that what Salt was doing? And that's correct. Salt was pretty much doing that. It wasn't doing the watching, but the intention is that Link will replace Salt. And some of the key differences with Link is that the interpreter is tracking the changes, so you don't have these funny comments appearing at the bottom of functions that were Salt's way of tracking changes. The interpreter is doing all of this under the covers. And we have this Filesystemwatcher, which allows you to say, well, I want to react to any changes if I use Emacs or VI, or I do a git pull, or anything that changes the contents of my files, I want them immediately into the workspace. And there's a limitation here in 17.1 that the Filesystemwatcher only works on Windows, but as we saw before lunch, we can expect to be watching file systems. So why is this important? This is the first slide I presented on this topic in this room in 2008 when we released the Unicode version. It's really important because if you manage to get your text files out into your source code out into text files, you have access to this enormous collection of really, really attractive tools for comparing, merging, setting up tests, as John also showed, being an adult. You can be an adult now with your APL code. Here are some of the most, the ones that we currently using heavily within Dyalog: Visual Studio Code for editing, Git for source code management, and Jenkins for integration, process integration. When we make a code change, we have it test and build things automatically. And all of that in addition to our own tools. We don't have to give up any of the tools that we're currently using, because all that's happening is this extra copy is being made outside the workspace. We can continue to trace and edit and exactly as we did before. So here are some tools over on the right side: Git, Subversion, Mercurial. Those are source code management systems. In the middle, some editors, GitHub, and on this side we have some of these continuous integration tools. Here's another screenshot. You saw this in my keynote. JD showed you VS Code, showing the kind of stuff that's available from tools that were written by people who had no idea that APL existed, right? We did a little bit of work, or Gil in this case, did some work to give us the APL syntax coloring, but apart from that, the comparison so on is something that would just work. Here's GitHub, which is a web representation of the same repository we were looking at before, the same code change, available for people to look at on the web without installing any APL software. They've just gone to this web page. They didn't install fonts or anything. The diff is visible for them to see. You can share your code and collaborate very easily with people. Here's an example of the integration stuff. So here's a change that Michael made to the contest system. And as soon as he makes a commit, something kicks in with Jenkins, runs tests, and we have this dashboard where we can see all the different stages that things are going through, running the tests, whether they're successful, and so on and so forth. And it's not just software tools. I mean, once you have stuff in text files, you can start attaching things to email messages. You can write email messages with APL code or APL symbols have just become completely ordinary things out in the world. You can have APL text in email messages. Under Linux now, all recent Linuxes, I don't remember, Jeff, when you did this, it's 4 or 5 years ago now. Longer. So any recent Linux version, if you just type setxkbmap, and then, in my case, DK for Denmark, comma APL, and which key I want to use to switch between the modes or enable the APL overlays, I can immediately type combinations of Danish and APL characters into Unix. So the environments have now reached a stage where you really can use APL with just about any kind of tool, even tools you've never heard of. So here's an email from Lars, who unfortunately couldn't be here this week. He gave us permission to show you this. He said, I was asked for the number of lines of code in our system, and I found some free software that can do the job for me. There's something called CLOC, clock, count lines of code. But I cannot make it recognize the comment character. So it was counting the comments as lines of code. And apparently at this company, they have a significant number of lines of comments, and it was actually screwing up the statistics, believe it or not. And so Adám went off and found this repository, count lines of code in many programming languages, it says. And in fact, some work had already been done to recognize, I think, the file types, but there was this problem with comment characters. But Adám was able to send a message to Lars Friday at 6:24 a.m. Really? And Lars had sent the request the previous afternoon, and we say, well, it now supports APL, and anybody in the world can go in and see exactly the changes that we made to clock to make this work. So now, here's another tool that's in that collection of tools. And this is growing really rapidly. So we're really happy to see that some people are really on the bandwagon already. Carlyle Group, I've mentioned before, Acre Desktop. In fact, they've published a whole collection of tools, and Paul's going to come on stage next and talk a little bit about how he does his work with Git. We've started publishing our own things on GitHub. And other benefits of text source, well, you can easily share not just with other environments, but between different versions of Dyalog APL. So there's no compatibility issue. It's just a text file. You can load it into any version of APL that you're using, even between Classic and Unicode. The text files are backwards and forwards compatible. What was that? I was sure there was something there. Drawbacks of text source. Oh, actually, I think this is the point where I'm supposed to hand over to Adám. My time is up. So, without further ado, unfortunately, I won't be able to complete that item. I don't believe there are any significant drawbacks, I will say. Demo time.
Right, so here I have a workspace that I've started doing things in. You might be able to discern that it's a clear workspace. That's how I prefer to work these days. But if we look inside with bracket map, that gives us this overview of what's inside the workspace. So we can see we have some variables, actually constants for what we're doing. We have some functions. And we have some, we have a namespace with utility functions inside. So this is how many of us that traditional APLs would start working. We're doing things inside APL, but instead of saving a workspace in this case, we're going to save everything as a directory structure with files in it. It is as easy as creating a link between hash, the workspace, and let's just take a place for this. I'm going to tell it that as opposed to loading some utility from somewhere, the source of my APL code is currently located in the namespace in the hash. And it responds that it has now been linked. So if I look in here, we can see that that we have a directory. It looks a bit funny. My app, it hasn't quite picked. Okay, we can do a tree view of my app, and we can see that it's just this. It
didn't do anything
with the files. So we can see we have this directory. This is the corresponds to hash. We have our utility namespace with functions inside. One thing you might notice was that we didn't get any of our variables across. That's because normal variables that you just assign, they're not part of your source code. They're just happening as side effects of what you're doing. If you have constants, which have kind of the class of being code, they're part of your source, then you need to tell Link that that is the case. So we can go inside APL, and we can say, we're going to add, in this case, all of our variables are actually constants, so we can just tell it all the variables should be added like this, and it tells us that it added these. And we can say, make a new list of that, and we can say that we now have these. So we have introduced these new file extensions that help you from the file system to distinguish what each file represents. So this is an APL array, and this is an APL function.
Why did you not use a user command for that?
The reason I didn't use a user command for it is because I wanted to both show that I can do this under program control, so you can build your own build system, your own export and import system, and so on. Also because I wanted in this case to have an array argument that was generated. So, but there's also an add user command. And in general, most things you can do with Link is both user commands and functions. You can use whichever one is most appropriate. However, I've decided that if you look at the workspace again, I don't really think that this utility directory, or namespace if you want, should be part of my repository of this project. It really belongs separately, so I can use that in other projects that I'm doing. So we can open it up here, and we can see the structure again. Over here we have this utility directory, and it's as easy as taking it and pulling it outside. So now it's not inside my my application anymore. It's next to it, so siblings. And then I can go back into an APL, and I can write Link create, and I'm going to make a utility namespace, and it's going to be linked with the corresponding folder. And Link will take care of what is inside what. So we notice here we have hash linked, and even though we have the utils namespace inside hash, Link keeps track of what belongs where. And if we generate a new function, so here we're going to make a very important one, this one, and no notifications of any sort. However, if we go back into Windows and look at our utils, then we now have the new duplication function, and we can even look at the code right inside, as Morten has mentioned before. Similarly, if we go and make a function go, then you can see that nothing happened in the utility directory. Rather, it's over here where it belongs. You can see it over here. It's really as simple as that. That's all you need to get started with Link. However, there are some issues still. To store arrays, we use this new proposed array notation, and with some help from, especially from Marshall, written a function that can generate this notation, and another one that can parse it and get the value out from it. And for commonly used types of arrays, it generates quite nice to look at code. That's all very good. However, some lesser used arrays, it maybe makes a bit too many parentheses. So we are, without any formal specifications really for it, but we can say €100 for each one of these cases, and then the rest of the money for various other either improvements to the existing code. It's all on GitHub, Dyalog/link, or replacement code for parts of it. You can, I mean, that's because these arrays, for example, they could just look like this, and the parser would still understand it. So try that. There's a lot more to link, a lot more details. It's a whole group of user commands. The easiest way to find out about just an overview of it is you can type in the APL session --link --. There's also, and the help text in the session will also guide you to that, there's a special wiki for link on GitHub as part of the repository. It opens up like this. And then there are separate entries for each function there and overviews of how things work, the general syntax and so on. So please go there, have a look at it, start using it, and by all means let us have some feedback from it. So, questions?
Is that it? Hi. My life. I talk too fast. I should have slowed down.
What happens when I create a function in my code? Sometimes it happens that you create on-the-fly function and you execute it. I hope it will not be sent to the repository. And if I have a namespace which contains a number of arrays which are in the definition of the namespace, I probably don't want other objects which are added during the execution of the program to go there.
Right. So the way Link is set up is that it only adds things that are created or modified, and only updates things that are modified using the editor. Okay? Things that are done with assignment, quadfx, quadfix, execute, quadns, all these various things you can make, they're not included. Sometimes you want to include them, that's why we have the add functionality. You can tell Link, I want these things added. After you add it, any further edits in the editor to a variable and so on, they will be retracked.
But if you are debugging one of those functions which creates a function, you enter in it because something went wrong.
Ah, yes.
And then you exit, maybe changing something to see if it was a good idea, you will get the monster in the repository.
Yep.
Yep.
If you have a good idea for how to deal with that, let us know.
I'm currently maintaining the Apex APL compiler source using Snap and dbuild. Do you have a migration path for that? The reason I ask is that there's several namespaces involved, and so for example, the utils thing, I've got like an array utilities, I've got an file utilities, and I've got Apex compiler utilities. And what I do for each of the namespaces that represent different parts of the compilation, I include all those utility functions in each namespace. So there's some redundancy here. The reason I do that is I don't want to have to write, if I have foo goo of A, I don't want to write Apex utils of foo of Apex arrays of goo of this, because the code gets this long. It really makes it unreadable. So all I want to do is make sure that the source code exists in one and only one place in the utilities, but I want it built into each of the namespaces. So the current dbuild function does exactly what I want.
But it only builds it once after you make changes. You're using
dbuild,
right? So the structure that's created by Snap should be completely compatible with this. You should be able to snap something and then use link to get it back in.
I think the question is really if you're using dbuild to bring the same functions into lots of different namespaces.
Correct.
And you want to, no matter which namespace you edit it in, you want it to find its way back. That should just work. That should just work. I mean, not with dbuild. You'd have to. I mean, dbuild is intended really to build distribution workspaces. It's not really intended to build.
I don't really care what tool I use. I want the same effect.
That should just work, right? The files that you've created using Snap, you should just be able to load with link without any changes.
Once I rename all the suffixes.
What happens more internally is that APL keeps track of, for each function, which file did it come from. And we also listen to changes in the files. So what would happen is if you go in the editor, you edit a function, it gets written to file, APL will get a notification back that this file has changed, and all the other copies of it will be updated to that.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Yeah, we may want to
we should
test that. I'm not sure what would happen if you change one file and it's linked to 7 different places in the workspace. But anyway.
So when can I expect this to work on Linux? I want to use this
It's
like a
working.
year ago.
It's working now.
It is?
The only thing
Okay.
that's not working on Linux is the Filesystemwatcher.
Yeah, that's an important part.
And
Like
I
the
don't
most
know
important
when
part.
we have a subcontractor on the .NET side. We need a .NET Linux Filesystemwatcher, and I think there's one in the labs somewhere.
Okay.
But so certainly by version 18, definitely. Maybe a test version earlier. Yeah.
Specifically just does that.
Yeah. Yeah. So.
If you want someone to test it, I'll be happy to.
Yeah, okay, noted. I'm very pleased that you think this is going in the right direction.
All right, so the link appears to connect one file object for one array object or one function object or one namespace object. I don't use Salt or Snap or any of those right now because I associate one file with a whole set of functions, but I want to choose the set of functions that I want in a given file manually. Can I make it so that each file contains, say, 20 functions, each one line long, and then those go into the system, and when those get written back, they get written back to the same file? And then I need to, and I don't want to annotate it with namespace pieces because I want multiple files to all feed into one namespace.
Okay, so there are a couple of different things you could do. Firstly, if you create the files, so link will create one file per item. But if you have a file that already contains multiple items, the system will keep track of where they come from and make the changes back to those. If you create any new things, it won't know to put it in such a file. It will currently just make a new thing for it. What you can also do is you say you don't want to have the namespaces, but if you do put things...
Well, I do want namespaces, but I don't want to have to annotate my files with namespace stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it should work, but it's probably a bit of a borderline case that we want to talk about, because I think the quad fix will allow you to fix a source file with multiple functions in it. But I think we've sort of said when we were working on the design of link that we were really first going after the one function, one file model, because that's what 95% of the users seem to want. We want to get that working first. I mean, one of the problems we would face then is if you create a new function in the workspace, where does it go?
Yeah.
Except you wouldn't be doing that because you'll be sitting in Emacs and typing it there, right?
Oh, that hurts. No.
No?
Emacs? Never.
Oh, I
think...
I'm reformed.
I thought you were an Emacs.
I've recovered from that
You've
particular
recovered from that.
psychosis.
I can't say that I've tried it, but I think
Yeah.
if you create these files outside of APL, they're just linked in, it should just work.
I think it will work, but you will be skating on thin ice.
Okay.
Right
That's
now.
okay.
Right now. Yeah. I think we have time for one more question.
Good, I have to.
Well, choose carefully.
Okay, first, any comments about sharing?
Yeah.
Second, if the text file knows which is the APL session it's linked to,
or any other interpreter, say from Mac or in
No.
the future, could access the same file, or it's just one-to-one relationship?
The interpreter only knows that a function is currently loaded from a file. If another interpreter is loaded from the same file, there's no problem, right? If that file changes, both interpreters will pick up the change.
So if I have two interpreters and both linked to the same text file,
Yeah.
and I do something in one interpreter, would the other interpreter immediately got the changes?
Yes, I think that's how
Sure.
it would work, yeah. However, if you're really going to be having multiple people working with it, you
Yeah.
should be using Git or something like that to manage the merges and you know, if two people were editing in the same in different workspaces, you would be in trouble. And that's what you need Git for, and that's what the next speaker is going to be talking a bit about. Paul's going to be
because
talking about Git.
to me it's a little bit of
This-
puzzle, because Git is something based on internet.
No, no, Git is a file-based.
So you can
GitHub
sync,
is on the internet.
You can sync directly to Git.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's one thing we should have emphasized. Our time is out, so Paul, maybe you can start making your way down here. This is not a source code management system. This updates files. You want to use a source code management system to manage the files. Well, yeah, Salt was created more than 10 years ago and thought it might need to do some source code management as well. Right. So, I think we're done. Thank you very much. The next